The thermal pools at Yellowstone reach temperatures of 199 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to dissolve human bone in hours. In the winter of 2019, a ranger found footprints leading into one of these pools, fresh prints in the snow, stopping right at the water's edge. No prints leading out. No body was ever recovered. 3 days later, that same ranger found his own notebook at the site, water damaged and warped from steam. Inside were entries he'd never written, describing in perfect detail what it felt like to watch himself walk into the boiling water. The entries were dated 2 weeks in the future. That ranger still works at Yellowstone. He won't talk about what happened, but his compass stopped pointing north that winter, and it never corrected itself. Welcome to Verified Whispers. Tonight, you'll hear 7 more stories like this. Stories kept out of official reports. Stories that made experienced rangers request immediate transfers. Stories that changed park protocols without public explanation. Some of these incidents are still unfolding, and if you make it to the end, you'll understand why certain areas of Yellowstone have rescue procedures that don't appear in any training manual. But before we begin, something we ask of everyone who finds these whispers: subscribe and turn on notifications, not for us, but because once you hear what's been kept quiet, you'll want to know when the next testimony surfaces. These stories have a way of finding the people who need to hear them. Make sure you're ready when the next one arrives. The first thing you need to understand about Yellowstone in winter is the silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that makes you notice your own breathing, your heartbeat, the crunch of snow under your boots that sounds too loud. And beneath all that frozen quiet, the ground is alive. Steam rises from cracks in the earth. Pools bubble at temperatures hot enough to strip flesh from bone. Everything around you is ice and death, and 6 feet below, the planet is boiling. That's where I was the morning it happened. Winter of 2019. Deep season. When most visitors are gone, and it's just skeleton staff keeping watch over a park that doesn't stop being dangerous just because the crowd's left. I was assigned to check thermal areas around Norris Geyser Basin. Routine patrol. In winter, you move carefully out there. The boardwalks help, but frost heaves shift foundations, snow hides weak spots, thermal activity undermines the ground beneath your feet. You trust your training, test each step, and you never, ever wander off the designated paths. That morning was brutally cold. No wind, just thin, pale light and steam rising in dense white columns that hung in the air like something solid. I did my radio check, strapped on my pack, and started toward Porcelain Basin with the easy confidence that comes from having walked those routes more times than you can count. 10 minutes in, I saw something wrong. A set of boot prints cutting across fresh snow at a sharp angle. Not along the boardwalk, across it, heading straight toward one of the hottest pools in the basin. They were fresh edges, still crisp, no wind softening, no drift inside. Someone had walked that line recently, purposefully, like they knew exactly where they were going. But that was impossible. Those areas are closed in winter. The signage is clear. The risk of stepping through thin crust into superheated ground is very real. You don't explore. You stay on the boardwalk. I stopped and stared. The basin exhaled around me, steam hissing, water churning. Everything else was dead silent. The prints cut from the tree line, past the boardwalk railing, straight across untouched snow toward the pool. I followed them with my eyes, boot after boot, same spacing, same direction. They led right to the water's edge and stopped. No turn, no backward step, no sign of slipping or falling. Just a final print at the very lip of that boiling water, toes almost hanging over. And then, nothing. Untouched snow on either side. No disturbance, no splash marks, just an end. You get a specific type of chill when your brain hits something it can't process. Not fear exactly, that slow sinking awareness that what you're seeing doesn't fit any box you've built over years of this work. I keyed my radio and reported it. Location, unidentified tracks, terminating at thermal feature. No visible subject. Dispatch acknowledged. No one had reported anyone missing. No abandoned vehicles, no staff unaccounted for. On paper, everyone was fine. That didn't change what I was looking at. I approached carefully, testing each step with my pole, never fully committing my weight. The heat hit me halfway there, coming up through my boots, flushing my face while the rest of me shivered. My breath went from freezing to thick and damp in seconds. The smell of sulfur burned my nose. Up close, the prints were perfect. Sharp edges, clear tread pattern. The snow just ended in that last impression, like someone had been erased mid-step. I looked into the pool. The water was opaque with steam, but when the wind shifted, I could see those deep, unnatural blues fading to murky brown. Temperature readings from that spot, 199 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to dissolve a body in hours. Yellowstone has taught that lesson before. I documented everything: time, location, conditions, number of tracks. I took photos. I sketched the pattern in my notebook. When you don't understand something, you anchor yourself in facts. The last line I wrote was simple: no person located. Tracks end at pool. I finished my patrol, logged my other checks. Nothing unusual, nothing worth remembering, except those prints. That night, back in my housing unit, I pulled out my notebook to write up my report. Routine. Boring. Usually takes 20 minutes. With coffee and bad lighting. I opened to my last entry and stopped breathing. Beneath the line where I'd stopped, no person located, tracks end at pool, there were 3 more lines in my handwriting. Same ink, same pen pressure, same quirks in the letters that I'd recognize anywhere. But I hadn't written them. I watched myself walk into the water at 10:42. I did not struggle. The surface closed over my head in less than 2 seconds. There was no pain. Next to them, in smaller text in the margin, 10:42 confirmed. I sat there while the room hummed around me, the heater ticking, the old fridge whining. My hands were so cold the pen nearly slipped from my fingers. I checked the time. 9:15 p.m. My first instinct was denial. Maybe I'd written it and forgotten. Long shifts, short sleep, it messes with your head. But that margin note, 10:42 confirmed. That sounded like documentation after an event, not during. I tried to rationalize it, tried to laugh it off. Instead, I grabbed my jacket and keys. The drive back to Norris was a blur of headlights on snowbanks and dashboard clock checks. 9:52, 10:03, 10:19. Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was idiotic, but my hands stayed on the wheel. The basin at night is wrong in ways that are hard to articulate. The steam looks thicker. The sound of boiling water seems louder, because there's nothing else, no birds, no distant traffic. Just the park's machinery, grinding away in the dark. I reached the boardwalk at 10:36. The pool was there in the darkness, rolling and hissing. I gripped the railing and stared at the spot where those footprints had ended hours before. 10:39. In the quiet between steam gusts, I became aware of something I can barely describe. It felt like standing at a junction between 2 versions of events. Like there was another set of steps I was supposed to be taking, and I'd somehow stepped off that path. My body wanted to turn toward the snow, to climb the railing, to follow a line that wasn't visible but still existed somewhere. 10:41. I dug my fingers into the wood and thought very clearly. If you let go, you're going to walk into that water. Not might, not could, will. The steam cleared for a moment, and I saw movement in the distorted reflection of the boiling surface. A figure, shoulders hunched, walking steadily toward the pool. Same height, same build, same jacket. The angles didn't match where I was standing. Like watching myself from a different camera. 10:42. Nothing happened. I didn't move. The pool kept boiling. The snow stayed undisturbed. But that heavy feeling, that sense of being pulled toward another set of actions, snapped. The pressure released. My breathing slowed. I stood there another few minutes, waiting for some sign the world had noticed me choosing differently. Nothing. Just Yellowstone's endless patience. Back in the truck, hands shaking, I opened my notebook under the dome light. The lines were still there, but now there was one more, written in deeper pressure, the pen digging into the paper. I chose not to go. The date at the top still read the 17th of January 2019. But next to it, barely visible, was a second date written in fainter ink. The 3rd of February 2019. 2 weeks from when I was sitting in that truck. I still work at Yellowstone. I still carry that notebook. And every winter when the temperature drops and the basin exhales its steam into frozen air, I think about those footprints that led into boiling water. I think about the version of me that followed them. And I wonder if he's still out there somewhere, writing in a notebook, watching himself make a different choice. They say wolves are predictable. That's what we teach visitors. Wolves hunt in packs. They communicate through body language and vocalizations. They follow patterns carved by thousands of years of evolution. You learn to read them. You learn what's normal. And when you've spent enough time in Lamar Valley watching these animals through binoculars, you develop an instinct for when something is off. Summer of 2021, I learned that instinct exists for a reason. It was peak season in the valley. That stretch of road between Soda Butte Creek and Specimen Ridge is probably the best wolf-watching real estate in North America. Tourists line up before dawn with spotting scopes and cameras worth more than my truck. The wolves know we're there. They don't care. They move through their territory like we're part of the landscape. I was stationed at one of the pullouts that morning, managing the crowd, making sure people stayed back from the road, answering the same questions I answer every summer. The light was perfect, that golden hour glow that makes everything look like a nature documentary. The Lamar Canyon pack was active about 400 yards out, moving through the sage in that loose, coordinated way packs do when they're not hunting, just traveling. 8 wolves. Healthy, relaxed, normal. I had my binoculars up, doing a mental count, noting positions for my log. Alpha, female in the lead, 2 juveniles flanking. The rest spread out behind in no particular formation. Standard stuff. I was about to lower the binos and check on the growing crowd when something made me pause. The wolves stopped. Not one at a time, like you'd expect when an alpha signals a halt, all of them. Simultaneously, mid-stride, like someone had pressed pause on the whole pack. For about 3 seconds, they were perfectly still, scattered across maybe 50 yards of open ground. Then they moved again, but not like before. They began walking in a pattern. I don't mean they got into formation. I mean they started moving with geometric precision. The alpha female took 5 steps forward and stopped. Exactly 5. The wolf behind her moved to the left, stopped after 4 steps. The next moved right. 4 steps. They were creating angles, spacing themselves with mathematical accuracy. I lowered the binoculars and looked with my naked eye, thinking maybe the magnification was playing tricks. Nope. Even at a distance, you could see it. The wolves were arranging themselves into a shape, not a hunting formation, not a defensive circle, a pattern. Within 2 minutes, they'd formed concentric rings. The alpha female in the center. 3 wolves around her in a perfect triangle. The remaining 4 in a larger circle around them. The spacing was identical. The distances were exact. And then they sat. All 8. At exactly the same moment. That's when the hairs on the back of my neck started to rise. The tourists were murmuring, excited, taking photos. They thought they were witnessing some rare behavior. I knew better. I'd watched wolves for 6 seasons. I'd seen hunts, territorial disputes, play behavior, mating displays. I'd never seen anything like this. I raised my binoculars again and focused on the alpha female. She was staring directly at me. Not in my general direction. At me. Her head was angled precisely toward my position. Eyes locked on where I stood behind the crowd, 400 yards away. Through dozens of people, vehicles, chaos, she was looking at me. Then, one by one, the other wolves turned their heads. Same angle, same deliberate movement. Within 10 seconds, every single wolf in that pack was facing my exact position. Not moving, not vocalizing, just watching. The tourists noticed. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else asked if wolves could see that far. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had gone dry. I've had animals watch me before. It's part of the job. Bears, elk, bison, they clock you. Assess whether you're a threat, move on. This wasn't that. This was focused attention. Intentional. Coordinated in a way that made my skin crawl. I lowered the binoculars and keyed my radio. Tried to keep my voice steady. This is Lamar Valley Station. I'm observing unusual wolf behavior. Requesting secondary observer if available. Dispatch acknowledged. Nearest backup was 30 minutes out. I raised the binos again. The wolves hadn't moved. Still sitting, still staring. The alpha's eyes were visible even at this distance, pale, gold, unblinking. Around me, the tourists had gone quieter. That nervous energy you get when a crowd senses something isn't quite right but can't articulate why. Then the wolves stood. Again, simultaneously. And they began to walk. Not toward us, not away. They began moving in a spiral pattern, tightening the circles, crossing each other's paths without collision, weaving in and out with the kind of precision you see in choreographed dance. The movements were fluid, but impossibly coordinated. No signals, no vocalizations, just synchronized motion. My hands were shaking enough that the binoculars wobbled. I braced them against the hood of my truck. The spiral tightened, the wolves moved faster, and through it all, whenever one of them passed through a position facing my direction, it would stop mid-movement, turn its head, lock eyes on me, then continue. 8 wolves, taking turns, watching me. The tourists were filming now, phones up, excited chatter building. They didn't understand what they were seeing. I barely understood what I was seeing. This wasn't animal behavior. This was something using animals. The spiral collapsed inward until all 8 wolves were moving in a tight circle, almost shoulder to shoulder, heads all angled toward the center. Then they stopped. Saturday, and as one unit, every head rotated back toward me. I felt it then. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The same feeling you get when you realize someone's been in your house while you were gone. Nothing taken, nothing disturbed, but the knowledge that you were observed, that something was paying attention. My radio crackled. Backup was 15 minutes out. The wolves held position for another minute, maybe longer. Time felt strange. Then the alpha female stood, and the pattern broke. The pack dispersed, moving off toward the tree line in normal wolf behavior, loose, uncoordinated, natural. Within 5 minutes, they disappeared into the timber. I stood there with my heart hammering against my ribs, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. The tourists started packing up, satisfied they'd gotten good photos. A few asked what the behavior meant. I gave some vague answer about pack dynamics. I don't think they believed me. I don't think I believed myself. Backup arrived 20 minutes later. I walked them through what happened, showed them my notes. They looked at me with that careful expression people use when they're trying to decide if you're serious or losing it. We checked the area where the wolves had been. Normal tracks, normal scat, no evidence of anything unusual. But when we got back to the truck, I noticed something. My compass was sitting on the dashboard where I'd left it. Standard issue, same one I'd carried for 3 years. The needle was pointing southeast. Not north, southeast. I picked it up, rotated it, watched the needle swing stubbornly back to that wrong direction. My backup checked his compass. Normal. Pointing north like it should. We compared them side by side. Mine was broken, or calibrated to something else. That was when I noticed the time. 16 hours had passed since I'd radioed for backup. Not 30 minutes. 16 hours. The sun was setting. The tourists were long gone. My backup wasn't the ranger I'd requested that morning, it was evening shift, wondering why I'd been standing at an empty pullout for the entire day. I had no memory of those hours. None. The last thing I clearly remembered was watching the wolves disappear into the tree line. Everything after that was gone. Not fuzzy, not vague, just absent, like someone had cut those hours out of my timeline. They took me to medical, ran tests, everything came back normal. No head injury, no drugs, no signs of stroke or seizure. The official report listed it as environmental exposure, possible dehydration, affecting cognition. They put me on light duty for a week. But here's what they didn't put in the report. When I walked out of the tree line that evening, and I have no memory of walking into it, I was carrying my notebook. Inside were detailed entries about wolf positions, movement patterns, exact timestamps covering those missing 16 hours. The handwriting was mine. The observations were technical, precise, professional. I documented everything, except I hadn't written any of it. The entries described the wolves maintaining their formation for the entire day, rotating positions every 43 minutes, never vocalizing, never breaking pattern, and every 7th rotation, all 8 would turn and face my position, even though, according to these notes, I'd been standing in the forest watching them from a completely different angle. The last entry, written at 6:47 p.m. minutes before backup found me, read, Subject has been adequately observed. Data collection complete. Recommend continuing monitoring protocol annually. My compass still doesn't work. I've tried replacing the mechanism, recalibrating it, buying new ones. Doesn't matter. Any compass I carry for more than a day starts pointing southeast. I've stopped trying to fix it. And here's the part that keeps me awake. Every year since then, on the same date, wolf activity in Lamar Valley stops for exactly 16 hours. Not reduced, not scattered, completely absent. No sightings. No tracks. No vocalizations. GPS collar data from researchers shows the wolves are there, but they're stationary, not sleeping, not denning, just still. For 16 hours. The tourist reports from those days describe wolves behaving normally. Moving, hunting, doing wolf things. But the timestamps on their photos don't match the times they remember taking them, and if you check the background carefully, you'll notice the shadows are wrong. The sun position doesn't align with the stated time. Park Service doesn't talk about it. There's no official acknowledgement. But rangers working Lamar Valley on that date now follow an unwritten protocol. Maintain distance, document only what's necessary, don't engage directly with wolf sightings, and whatever you do, don't try to fill in gaps in your memory if they occur. I still work that valley, I still watch the wolves, but I've learned to recognize when their movements stop looking like animal behavior and start looking like something else, when the geometry gets too perfect, when the timing becomes too precise, and when that happens, I get in my truck and I drive away. Because the wolves aren't watching visitors anymore. They're watching us. And whatever taught them to move in those patterns, whatever used them to observe me for 16 hours, is still out there, still paying attention, still collecting data. I just don't know what it's planning to do with it. There's a room in the park archives that smells like old paper and dust and something else, something chemical and faintly sweet that gets into your throat and stays there. Most of us avoid it. The filing system is a mess. Half the documents are mislabeled, and honestly, most historical records aren't relevant to current operations. But in 2020, during the pandemic shutdown when we had time to kill and nowhere to go, someone decided we should finally digitize everything. That's how I ended up spending 3 weeks in that room, scanning documents I barely looked at, just trying to get through the stacks. I found the film canister on a Tuesday. It was in an evidence box that shouldn't have been there. Archives are for paperwork, not physical evidence. The box was unmarked except for a year written in faded marker, 1987. Inside were the usual things you'd expect from that era. Incident reports on crumbling carbon paper. A few confiscated items from violations, pocket knives, fire-starting materials, that kind of thing. And at the bottom, wrapped in a deteriorating plastic bag, was a Super 8 film canister. The metal was warped, heat damage, I thought at first, but the pattern was wrong, melted in spots, almost like it had been pressed against something extremely hot on one side only. The label was mostly illegible, just a few letters visible. Orison Trail Survey OG 8. I shouldn't have opened it. Evidence, integrity, chain of custody, all that. But it was sitting in an archive box that had clearly been forgotten for 33 years, and I was bored, and curious, and stupid. The film inside was partially melted to the reel. The acetate had that vinegar smell, that means it's decomposing. I carefully unwound what I could, and held it up to the light. A few frames were visible. Trees, a trail marker, someone's boot in the foreground. Standard survey documentation. I logged it, photographed it, and probably would have forgotten about it entirely if our digitization coordinator hadn't gotten excited. Turned out we had an old Super 8 projector in storage, and she'd been looking for an excuse to test it. So 3 days later, we set up in one of the conference rooms with the projector, a sheet hung on the wall, and that decomposed film threaded carefully through the machine. There were 4 of us watching. Me, the coordinator, another ranger, and an admin assistant who'd heard we were screening something and wanted a break from data entry. We dimmed the lights, fired up the projector, and watched the cone of light hit the makeshift screen. The footage started normal enough. Someone walking a trail with a camera, documenting conditions. The timestamp in the corner read the 14th of August, 1987. Trees passed by in that jittery handheld way. A glimpse of Heart Lake through the pines. The surveyor's shadow visible on the trail ahead. Professional work, methodical, exactly what you'd expect from training documentation. Then the footage stuttered. Not like a mechanical skip, like the film itself was damaged. Visual distortion, frames bleeding into each other. When it cleared, the camera was moving faster, bouncing violently. You could hear breathing on the audio track, rapid and panicked. The image swung wildly, trees, sky, ground, trees again. Someone was running. The timestamp hadn't changed. Still the 14th of August, 1987, same minute as before. But everything else was different. The light was wrong, too dim, like dusk, instead of afternoon. The trees looked the same, but somehow off. Shadows falling at angles that didn't match the visible sun. Then we heard the voice. A man, gasping between words, barely coherent. Can't be real. They're not real. They're not. Heavy breathing. The camera swung up, and for a moment you could see the trail ahead. Dark. Empty. Then it whipped around, facing back the way he'd come. That's when we saw them. In the background, between the trees, there were shapes. Human height. Standing motionless among the pines. But the proportions were wrong. Too thin. And where their faces should have been, there was nothing. Not blur, not shadow, literally nothing. Smooth surfaces where features should exist. The coordinator paused the projector. Nobody said anything for a moment. On screen, frozen mid-frame. You could count them. 7 figures. All the same height. All facing the camera. Could be light damage, the admin assistant said, but her voice was uncertain. Film degradation, maybe? We let it play. The running continued. The breathing got worse. The voice came back. In the trees. They're in the fucking trees. They don't have faces. Then a crash. Like the camera hitting the ground. The image went sideways, showing dirt and pine needles in extreme close-up. More breathing, sobbing now. Scrabbling sounds. Then, the image stabilized. The camera was upright again, but stationary. Propped against something. It was aimed down the trail. You could see boots in the lower frame, the surveyor's boots. Presumably, he'd set up the camera and backed away. For maybe 20 seconds, nothing happened. Just the empty trail, the boots in frame, the sound of ragged breathing off camera. Then the breathing stopped. The boots didn't move. No one walked into frame. But slowly, very slowly, those boots began sliding backward. Not walking, sliding, like they were being pulled by something we couldn't see. They moved smoothly out of frame. And the image was just the empty trail again. The timestamp in the corner jumped. Suddenly, it read the 14th of August, 1987, 6:47 p.m. 3 hours later than it had been seconds before. The light in the footage had changed too. Full dusk now, that deep blue-gray right before dark. The camera stayed still. Nothing moved, nothing happened. Just the trail, empty, darkening. Then the static hit. Complete visual breakup, audio screeching. It lasted maybe 5 seconds before the film ran out, and the projector's light just showed the blank wall. Nobody moved. The projector's fan hummed in the silence. Finally, the coordinator got up and turned on the lights without saying anything. "What the hell was that?" the admin assistant asked. "Training footage," I said, but I didn't believe it. The coordinator was already at her laptop, typing. "Morrison," she said. "That was the name on the canister. Let me check personnel records." She found it within minutes. There'd been a ranger named Morrison working Heart Lake area in 1987. Incident report from August listed him as a hiking casualty, lost his footing on a cliff edge near the lake, fell approximately 60 feet, died on impact. Body recovered August 16. Routine accident. No mention of unusual circumstances. The date on the incident report was the 14th of August, 1987. The same day as the film. "When was his body found?" I asked. The coordinator scrolled. "Says here the recovery team went out on the 16th, but the report notes the estimated time of death as late afternoon on the 14th. They based it on, she paused. On his watch. It had stopped at 3:22 p.m. I felt something cold move through my chest. What time did the film show at the beginning? Before the distortion? We rewound it, let it play again just long enough to see the timestamp, 3:20 p.m. The admin assistant stood up. "I'm not watching the rest of this." "There is no rest," the coordinator said quietly. "That was all of it." But she was wrong. When we examined the canister again, we found something we'd missed. Inside, stuck to the inner wall with some kind of residue, was a small strip of film that had separated from the main reel. Maybe 10 frames? The coordinator held it up to the light. It showed a single image, repeated slightly differently across the frames. The camera, on its side, lying in the dirt, and standing over it, looking down directly into the lens, was a figure. Same proportions as the ones in the trees. Same wrong height, same absence where a face should be. But this one had something the others didn't. In the center of that blank space, there was writing, scratched or burned into the film itself, cutting across the figure's non-face. 3 words in rough letters. Processed August 28. Morrison's memorial service was held the 29th of August, 1987. The film had been developed the day before they buried him. His camera was never recovered from the scene. The incident report mentioned it as missing, possibly carried away by wildlife or knocked into the lake during the fall. But if the camera was never found, who developed the film? Who processed it 2 weeks after Morrison died? And how did it end up in an evidence box that was never logged, never cataloged, buried in archives for 33 years? We sent everything to park administration, filed a report, asked questions. The response came back 3 weeks later. The film was too degraded for meaningful analysis. Morrison's case was closed decades ago, and the footage was likely a training exercise that got mislabeled. They thanked us for our diligence and told us to continue with digitization. But here's what they didn't address. When the coordinator checked the film processing date against lab records, she found something. The park's film processing lab did log a delivery on the 28th of August 1987. 1 canister, no name attached. The tech who processed it noted in the log that the footage was damaged and disturbing, possible evidence, forwarded to appropriate department. That tech requested a transfer 3 days later, left Yellowstone entirely by the end of September. The coordinator tracked her down. She's still alive, living in Montana. She agreed to a phone call, but hung up the moment we mentioned the Morrison film. She called back an hour later, said she'd only say this once and never wanted to discuss it again. That film was in the camera when I opened the canister. The camera was inside, melted shut, but inside. And the camera shouldn't have existed. I checked the serial number. It was registered to Morrison, yes, but the manufacturing date on that model was 1992, 5 years after he died. I logged it wrong in the system because I didn't want to file a report that made me sound insane. I just wanted it gone. She hung up again. Hasn't answered since. I still work in those archives sometimes. The box is gone now, properly stored in evidence, wherever that actually is. But I think about that film. About Morrison running through trees that weren't quite right, from things that shouldn't exist. About his camera showing up in a canister 5 years before it was manufactured, with footage processed 2 weeks after he died. And I think about those 7 figures standing in the trees. Because in that last frame, the one showing the figure looking down at the camera, you can see something else if you look carefully. In the background, barely visible through the trees, there are 6 more figures, all standing in a line, all facing the same direction, all watching where the camera was pointing. And behind them, deeper in the trees where the light almost doesn't reach, there might be more. The image is too degraded to be sure. But the darkness back there has shapes in it. Regular shapes. Human height. Dozens of them, maybe. All standing perfectly still. All watching. All waiting. Morrison's watch stopped at 3:22 p.m. on the 14th of August 1987. But the final timestamp on that film, right before the static hit, read 6:47 p.m. That's 3 hours and 25 minutes of missing time that exists on film, but nowhere else. 3 hours and 25 minutes of Morrison doing something, going somewhere, becoming something that could operate a camera 2 weeks after he was supposed to be dead. The cliff he fell from is still there. People hike past it all the time. It's not restricted. It's not marked. And every year, on August 14th, the Heart Lake Ranger Station logs unusual equipment malfunctions. Cameras stopping at 3:22, watches resetting to that time, compasses spinning, radio static that sounds almost like breathing. It lasts exactly 3 hours and 25 minutes. Then everything goes back to normal. Except for one thing. Every year, The trail camera near Morrison's Cliff captures something at 6:47 p.m. on August 14th. It's never quite in frame, always at the edge. But it's there, and it's getting closer. You know that feeling when you hear something that doesn't make sense, but your brain tries to rationalize it anyway? Like when you're alone in a house and you hear footsteps, and you tell yourself it's the pipes or the settling foundation, even though you know exactly what footsteps sound like? That's what this was. Except I couldn't rationalize it. Because what I was hearing was impossible. I was on backcountry maintenance duty in Shoshone Geyser Basin, fall of 2018. Remote area, minimal traffic, mostly just monitoring equipment, checking thermal activity. We have sensors down there that measure temperature, seismic activity, gas emissions, standard stuff for an active geothermal area. The readings get transmitted back to the main station, and once a month, someone hikes out to physically check the equipment, swap batteries, clear debris, make sure nothing's malfunctioning. That someone was me that October. The basin is beautiful in a hostile sort of way. Constant steam rising from vents and pools, ground that's warm enough to melt snow even in deep winter. The smell of sulfur so thick it coats the back of your throat. You walk carefully out there. The crust can be thin. What looks like solid ground might be a shell over boiling water. People have died stepping in the wrong place. I reached the monitoring station around noon. Small metal box on a concrete pad, solar panel on top, sensors running down into a vent about 20 feet away. Routine check. I pulled out my tablet, connected to the system, started reviewing the data logs. That's when I noticed the audio anomaly. We don't usually monitor sound, the equipment is for geological data, but these sensors pick up vibrations. And vibrations include acoustic frequencies. Normally, it's just white noise, the constant rumble of geothermal activity. But the graph showed something different. Regular peaks, rhythmic, too regular to be natural. I pulled up the audio file and plugged in my headphones. At first, it was exactly what I expected. Low rumbling, hissing, the random pops and gurgles of superheated water moving through rock. Then, underneath it, I heard the pattern. A rhythmic scraping sound. Metal on stone, maybe. Slow, deliberate, consistent interval. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. It repeated for several minutes in the recording, then stopped. I checked the timestamp, 3 a.m., 2 days prior. I thought maybe it was equipment malfunction. Sensor cable, dragging on rock, thermal expansion causing something to shift. I made a note to check the physical setup, but when I scrolled back through the data, I found more instances. Same sound, same rhythm. Going back weeks. Always between 2 and 4 a.m. Always when the ambient temperature dropped below 50 degrees. I sat there on that concrete pad, staring at my tablet, listening to that scraping sound repeat through my headphones. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. It was too deliberate. Too consistent. Not random thermal movement. Something was making that sound on purpose. The vent was 20 feet away, steam pouring out in a steady column. I walked over slowly, testing each step. The ground was warm through my boots. The smell intensified as I got closer, that rotten egg stench of hydrogen sulfide. I crouched at the edge, careful not to get too close, and looked down into the darkness. The vent dropped away into nothing. Just black space and rising heat. I couldn't see the bottom. These things can go down hundreds of feet, connecting to unmapped cavern systems in the thermal layers below. No one knows how extensive they are. No one goes down there. I pulled out my flashlight and aimed it into the opening. The beam disappeared into steam and darkness, illuminating nothing useful. But as I moved the light around the edges, something caught my attention. The rocks at the rim were marked, scratched. Long parallel grooves cut into the stone, all roughly the same depth. All angled in the same direction. Like something had been dragged across them. Or something had been scraping them deliberately. I took photos, measurements. The marks were fresh, no weathering, no mineral deposits filling them in, and there were a lot of them. I counted at least 40 distinct scratch marks around the accessible portion of the vent opening. Back at the monitoring station, I pulled up the full audio archive. The scraping went back months. Not every night, but frequently. Always the same hours. I did a rough count based on the frequency. If each scraping sound represented one mark, And the pattern had been going on since spring when the equipment was installed. There should be thousands of marks down there. I radioed it in, explained what I'd found. Dispatch acknowledged and said they'd noted in the log. They didn't sound particularly concerned. Thermal areas do weird things. Rocks shift, minerals deposit and break off. Heat expansion creates all kinds of acoustic phenomena. But I couldn't let it go. I requested the geological survey data for that vent. Took 3 weeks to get the files, but when they came through, I found something interesting. In the 1,960 seconds, there'd been an attempt to map some of the deeper thermal caverns in that area. 3 researchers went down with climbing gear, heat suits, the works. They made it about 200 feet before conditions got too dangerous: temperature, gas concentrations, unstable rock. They aborted the expedition. 2 of them made it back up. The third disappeared. Rope failed, according to the report. He fell into a lower chamber that was inaccessible for recovery. Estimated fall distance, another 100 feet, minimum. Into superheated caverns with toxic gas concentrations and temperatures exceeding 150 degrees. No one could survive that. The body was never recovered. Case closed. His name was logged in the incident report. I won't use it here, but I will tell you this. When I cross-referenced the date of the accident with the current audio pattern, something clicked. The scraping started appearing in the data logs exactly 60 years after the date he disappeared. 60 years. To the day. I went back out there a week later. Unofficial visit, off the clock, with equipment I wasn't technically authorized to use. I set up a hydrophone, a waterproof microphone, and lowered it into the vent on a cable. Dropped it as deep as I could, about 80 feet, until the heat started melting the insulation. I waited until 2 a.m., sitting in the dark next to that vent with my recording equipment, watching steam rise into the cold night sky. At 2:14 a.m., the scraping started. But this time, I could hear it clearly. Not muffled by rock and distance. Direct audio from down in that darkness. And it wasn't random. It was methodical. Scrape. 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 Scrape, pause, scrape, 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 scrape. 4 scrapes, pause, 5 scrapes, pause. Then 3, then 6, then 4 again. It was counting, or marking, creating some kind of pattern in the rock down there in the dark where nothing should be alive. I pulled the hydrophone up when the sound stopped around 3:30 a.m. The cable was partially melted. The microphone casing was warped from heat, but it had recorded everything. When I analyzed the audio later, I found something underneath the scraping. Very faint, almost inaudible. Breathing. Slow, labored, rhythmic breathing. And underneath that, even fainter, something that might have been words, too distorted to make out clearly, but the cadence was there, someone speaking, or trying to. I sent everything to Park Administration. All the data, the recordings, the geological surveys, the connection to the 1,960 seconds incident. I asked for a proper investigation, requested a team with appropriate equipment to examine the lower chambers. The response took 2 months. When it came, it was brief. The audio anomalies were attributed to geothermal activity. The scratch marks were consistent with thermal fracturing and mineral crystallization. The breathing sounds were explained as gas venting through narrow passages. No investigation was warranted. The vent would continue to be monitored remotely. But they did update the maintenance protocols. New rule. All equipment checks at that location must be completed before sunset. No overnight monitoring permitted. If audio anomalies are detected, they should be logged, but not investigated further. Under no circumstances should any personnel attempt to access the lower chambers of the vent system. That protocol is still in effect, and the scraping continues. Every winter, when the temperature drops, between 2 and 4 a.m., I've tracked it now for 6 years. The pattern has remained consistent. 4, 5, 3, 6, 4. Repeating. Always the same sequence. Until last year. Last year, the pattern changed. It's still scraping. Still counting. But now it's different numbers. 7, 7, 7. Over and over. 7 marks. Pause. 7 marks. Pause. I looked up what 7 repeated means in emergency code. 3 sevens. It's an old system. Mostly obsolete, but it used to mean one thing. Distress signal. Help needed. Urgent. I did the math. If something has been down there since 1962, scraping marks into rock, creating patterns in the dark, counting something we can't understand, how many marks are down there now? I went back to the geological data, measured the accessible scratch marks, calculated their depth and spacing. Based on the audio frequency and the time elapsed, I estimated roughly how many marks could have been made in 60 years of scraping. The number I got was 87,000. 87,000 individual marks carved into rock in absolute darkness by something that shouldn't exist. And here's what keeps me awake. If you divide 87,000 by the number of days since that researcher disappeared, you get a very specific number, approximately 4. 4 marks per day, for 60 years. The exact same pattern I heard that first night. 4 scrapes, pause. It's not random, it's not geological. Something down there has been counting days, marking time, creating a calendar in the dark, waiting for something, or trying to communicate, or just existing in conditions that should have killed it decades ago. The thermal monitoring shows that vent system connects to caverns that might go down 500 feet or more. Temperature down there could be 180, 190 degrees. Gas concentrations that would kill in minutes. No food, no water, no light. Nothing survives that. But something is down there. Something that scrapes rock. Something that breathes. Something that's been counting for 60 years. And now it's changed its pattern to 7s. Emergency signal, distress call. After 6 decades, whatever is down there is finally calling for help. The question is, help with what? Last week, maintenance equipment picked up something new. Not scraping, not breathing, something else. Rhythmic impacts, like footsteps, moving through the lower chambers, getting closer to the surface, slow, uneven, but persistent. The monitoring data shows it's ascending, about 3 feet per day. If it maintains that pace, it'll reach the accessible portions of the vent system in approximately 18 months. Park Service updated the protocols again. That vent is now closed to all personnel. The area around it is being quietly designated for habitat restoration, which means keeping people away without explaining why. But they can't stop what's coming up. And when I listen to the latest recordings, underneath the scraping and the breathing and the footsteps, there's something else now. It sounds like someone saying a name. Over and over. Their own name, maybe? Trying to remember who they used to be. Before they spent 60 years in the dark. Photography is about patience. You learn that early. You wait for the light, you wait for the animal, you wait for the moment when everything aligns. Sometimes you wait hours for a shot that lasts 2 seconds. And when you're alone in Hayden Valley at dawn, with your camera on a tripod and a herd of bison moving through the mist, you think you understand what patience means. You don't. Not until you see 1,247 photos of absolutely nothing, and realize something was waiting with far more patience than you could ever imagine. This was May 2017. We got a call about a missing photographer. Woman in her 30s, experienced, had permits for backcountry shooting. She'd checked in with a ranger 2 days prior, said she was setting up in Hayden Valley to catch the bison at sunrise. When she didn't return to her campsite and missed her checkout, we started looking. I was part of the search team. We found her setup first. Camera still on the tripod, exactly where you'd put it for a wide landscape shot overlooking the valley. Battery indicator showed 89%, which was strange. If she'd been shooting for hours, that battery should have been lower. Memory card nearly full though. Typical for a serious shoot. But no photographer, no footprints leading away. Her gear bag was nearby, organized, nothing disturbed. It was like she just evaporated mid-session. We documented everything, bagged the camera as evidence, continued the search. Standard procedure. Except, nothing about this felt standard. Hayden Valley is open country you can see for miles. If someone walks away from a position, you see them. If they have trouble, they call out and the sound carries. This woman had simply stopped existing at her camera. 3 days later, we found her at Yellowstone Lake. 12 miles from where she'd been shooting. Dehydrated, confused, barefoot. Her feet were torn up, bleeding. like she'd walked those 12 miles without shoes. But when we asked what happened, she insisted she'd never left the lakeshore. Said she'd been there the whole time, waiting for us to find her. No memory of Hayden Valley. No memory of setting up a camera or photographing bison. We brought her to medical, treated the dehydration and foot injuries, asked gentle questions. She was adamant. She'd been at the lake the entire time. When we showed her photos of her camera setup in Hayden Valley, she stared at them like we were showing her pictures of someone else's equipment. The camera went into evidence. I logged it, tagged it, and probably would have forgotten about it if I hadn't been the one assigned to review the contents. Sometimes you get details that don't add up, and you need to examine every photo, every video, every piece of data to reconstruct what happened. I pulled the memory card that evening, loaded it onto my computer, and started going through the images. The first few dozen were exactly what you'd expect. Setup shots, the tripod legs, the angle check, a few test exposures. Then, the actual shoot began. Bison herd in the distance, maybe 300 yards out. Beautiful composition, that soft dawn light, mist rising off the grass. Professional quality work. She'd set the camera to interval shooting. 1 photo every minute. Automatic. You do that when you want to capture gradual movement, changing light, animals migrating across frame. Let the camera work while you observe. The bison shots continued for about 40 frames. The herd was moving slowly, grazing, drifting across the valley. Normal behavior. Then, frame 41, the bison were gone. Not moved out of frame. Gone. The valley was empty. Same composition. Same light. Same everything. Just no bison. Not a single animal visible anywhere in that massive, open space. And the camera kept shooting. 1 photo per minute, automatically, for the next 6 hours. I scrolled through them, frame after frame. Identical shots. Same valley, same angle. Same dead grass and sagebrush and distant tree line. No movement, no animals. No changes whatsoever. The light shifted as the sun rose higher, but nothing else moved. It was like looking at the same photograph repeated over and over, except the metadata confirmed these were different images, taken at different times. 1,247 photos of an empty valley. I checked the timestamps. They were consecutive, 1 minute apart, starting at 6:18 a.m. and continuing until 12:35 p.m. 6 hours and 17 minutes of nothing. Then, photo 1,248, something changed. There was a person in the shot, standing in the valley, maybe 50 yards from the camera position. Back to the camera. Same build as our missing photographer. Same jacket, just standing there, facing away, completely still. My skin prickled. I zoomed in. The figure was clear. In focus. Perfectly exposed. Definitely human. Definitely alone. In that massive, empty landscape. I clicked to the next photo. 1 minute later. The figure had moved closer, maybe 5 yards, still facing away, still that unnatural stillness between frames. Next photo. Closer still. I started clicking through them faster. Each frame showed the figure 1 step closer to the camera, never turning around, never showing her face. Just that slow, steady approach. 1 step per minute. The intervals were exact. By photo 1,300, she was 20 yards away. By 1,350, she was close enough to see details. The jacket had dirt on it. Her hair was loose, hanging down her back. Her posture was wrong, somehow too rigid, shoulders too square. Photo 1,400 showed her 10 yards away. The back of her head filled more of the frame. I could see her hands at her sides, fingers spread stiffly. I didn't want to keep clicking. Every instinct said stop, close the file, walk away. But I needed to see. I needed to know what happened. Photo 1,450. 5 yards. Close enough to see the texture of her jacket, the individual strands of her hair. Photo 1,480. 3 yards. The camera's focus had shifted slightly, compensating for the closer subject. Every detail was sharp. Photo 1,500. 2 yards. She was so close now that her back filled most of the frame. I could see wrinkles in the fabric. A small tear near the collar. Photo 1520, 1 yard. The frame was mostly her jacket, her hair. Still facing away. I was sweating. My hand trembled on the mouse. 27 photos left. Photo 1535 showed her at maybe 3 feet. Close enough that the camera couldn't fit her entire back in frame, just fabric and hair and the edge of one shoulder. Photo 1540. Closer. The focus was struggling. She was almost against the lens. Photo 1545. The frame was filled with jacket fabric. Extreme close-up. You could see individual threads. Then photo 1546. The figure was gone. The frame showed the valley again, empty, exactly like the first 1247 shots, just grass and distance and nothing. But the camera had moved. The angle was different, slightly lower, tilted a few degrees left, like someone had bumped the tripod. The next photo showed the same thing, and the next, all the way to photo 1600, where the memory card filled up and the camera stopped shooting. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to process what I'd just seen. Then, I checked the camera's GPS log. Every camera has GPS now. It tracks where photos are taken. This one had logged every shot with coordinates. The first 1,247 photos showed the camera exactly where we'd found it. Hayden Valley, consistent coordinates, no movement. But starting with photo 1248, the first one with the figure, the coordinates changed. The camera showed as being at Yellowstone Lake, 12 miles away, right where we'd found the photographer 3 days later. And it stayed there through all those shots of the figure walking closer. The camera was logged as being at the lake while photographing Hayden Valley, 2 locations at once. Then at photo 1546, when the figure vanished, the coordinates jumped back to Hayden Valley, where we'd found the camera on its tripod. I checked the timestamps against our search records. The photos showing the figure approaching were taken during the window when we were actively searching for her. While we were in Hayden Valley looking for any sign of her, her camera was photographing her walking toward itself from a location 12 miles away. I pulled up her footprint data. She'd been wearing a fitness tracker. The device logged 87,000 steps during those 6 hours, roughly 42 miles of walking. But she insisted she'd never moved from Yellowstone Lake. The camera said it was at the lake, filming the valley. Her fitness tracker said she'd walked 42 miles. We found her barefoot at the lake with shredded feet. Her shoes were never recovered. But here's the detail that made me close the file and request someone else finish the review. In photo 1545, the last one before the figure disappeared, the extreme close-up of jacket fabric, there was something visible at the edge of the frame, just barely in focus. The corner of something dark and rectangular. I enhanced the image, increased the contrast. It was clear enough to identify a camera. Specifically, the same model we'd found on the tripod. Same manufacturer's logo visible on the lens barrel. Same custom grip tape the photographer had applied. She was carrying a camera, while being photographed by her camera, while walking toward herself. I checked the evidence log. We'd recovered 1 camera from the scene. Her family confirmed she'd brought 2, 1 for the tripod, 1 handheld for different angles. The second camera was never found. But I think it's still taking pictures. Because every year since then, on the same date in May, the trail cameras in Hayden Valley record something strange. Not every camera, just the ones positioned with a view of where her tripod was set up. For exactly 6 hours and 17 minutes, the wildlife cameras show an empty valley. No animals, no movement, just dead space where there should be life. And at the end of those 6 hours, there's always one frame that's different. A figure standing in the distance. Back to the camera. Same jacket, same posture. 1 step closer than the year before. Park Service doesn't talk about it. The cameras are checked. The images are logged. And everyone pretends it's a technical glitch. But I've seen the progression. I've tracked how far that figure moves each year. In 2024, it was 40 yards from the camera position. This year, it was 35. At this rate, it'll reach the camera in 7 more years. And I have this image in my head that I can't shake. What happens when it gets there? When it closes that final distance? Does it stop? Does it turn around? Or does it pick up the camera and start walking toward the next one? The photographer still lives in the area. She never went back to professional photography. Says she can't look through a viewfinder anymore without feeling like she's seeing through someone else's eyes. Like the moment she looks through the lens, she's not controlling what she's seeing. Something else is showing her what it wants her to see. Her fitness tracker still works. She wears it every day. But once a year, on that same date in May, it logs exactly 87,000 steps. Even when she doesn't leave her house. Even when she's sleeping. Even when she takes the battery out. 87,000 steps. 42 miles. The exact distance from Hayden Valley to Yellowstone Lake and back. Something is still walking that route, every year, wearing her face, following her path. And every year, it gets a little bit closer to finding its way back. If you really want to know what keeps people like me up at night, it's not bears, or getting lost, or even the thermal pools. It's sounds. Sounds that shouldn't exist, coming from places where nothing living should be. Because you can close your eyes. You can look away. But if you're standing there, and you hear something that's not supposed to be possible, your mind doesn't get to look anywhere else. It has to deal with it. For me, it started with the Firehole River. Most visitors think of that river as pretty, almost gentle, warm water, mist rising off the surface, fishermen waist-deep in waders. What they don't think about is what's underneath. That river is fed by half the geyser basins in the park. Boiling water, minerals, acids, all of it flowing through cracks and channels we've never mapped, over rock that's constantly being reshaped by heat and pressure. In winter 2016, we installed a set of hydrophones in a stretch of the Firehole between Old Faithful and Midway Geyser Basin. Officially, it was to monitor underwater erosion and thermal output. Unofficially, the scientists wanted to see if there were patterns in the way the riverbed changed during cold snaps. My part was simple. Check the equipment once a week, download the recordings, flag anything weird. The first few weeks were exactly what you'd expect. Water noise, constant hiss and rush, the rumble of current over rock, the occasional crack or thud when something heavy shifted downstream. White noise, basically. You listen long enough, and your brain turns it into a kind of static. Then, in late January, one of the researchers emailed me with a question that made my stomach tighten. Have you listened to the 2:04 a.m. segment from the 19th yet? I hadn't. Usually, I just batch upload the data and let them analyze it. That night, though, I stayed in the office after my shift and queued up the file. Headphones on. Lights low. Just me and the river in my ears. At first, it sounded like any other recording. Water moving, faint thermal burbles, that deep vibration you feel more than hear. Then, underneath it, something sharper. Metal. A scraping, rhythmic sound. Not random clanging. Slow, deliberate contact. Metal dragging against rock in long, measured strokes. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. Always the same pace. Always the same pressure. I scrubbed back. Listened again. Turned down the overall volume to isolate it. There it was. Clear as anything. Coming through the hydrophone like it was only a few feet away. Something metallic was on the riverbed, and something, or someone, was using it to carve into rock. The pattern went on for almost 2 hours, from just after 2 a.m. until about 3:50. Then, it stopped. Clean. No fade out, no gradual slowing. One final scrape and silence, just the river again. I checked the environmental data attached to that time window. Water temperature, just under 50 degrees Fahrenheit at the surface. Air temp, well below freezing. That section of river was steaming like a cauldron that night. No recorded maintenance, no divers. No authorized activity. Nothing that could explain what I was listening to. We brought it up in a meeting the next day. The responses were what you'd expect. Equipment artifact, cable drag, ice forming and breaking. We went down the list of rational explanations and tried to fit one over that sound. None of them quite matched. One of the geologists asked me to pull recordings from previous weeks at the same time window, so I did. The scraping was there. On the 12th, the 5th, the last week of December. Little variations, but always between 2 and 4 a.m. Always when the water cooled just enough at the surface to form that thick, roiling steam cloud above it, and always that same slow, counting rhythm. We decided to do a visual survey of the area. It's not a simple dive spot. Current, temperature gradients, visibility, all of it makes underwater work there risky. But we had tethered cameras rated for the heat, so we dropped one on a cable from an access point upriver and let it drift and crawl along the bottom. Most of what it showed was exactly what we expected. Rock, sand, occasional chunks of fallen mineral deposits, the ghostly sway of aquatic plants. But about 50 yards downstream from the main hydrophone, the light caught something that made the researcher next to me curse under his breath. Marks. At first it looked like natural scoring, where rocks had scraped each other. Then the camera moved closer, and the pattern became clearer. Not random, not chaotic. Lines carved into the stone, each one about the same length, the same depth. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stretching out of frame in both directions. They were arranged in clusters, 20 or 30 marks in one patch, then a gap, then another patch, like someone had been tallying, keeping count. We followed the marks along the bottom as far as the cable allowed. Every few feet, more of the same. Grooves in the rock, fresh-looking, not softened or filled in by mineral deposits yet, new enough that they had sharp edges. The geologist estimated that, given the rate of deposition in that section of the river, those marks couldn't be more than 5 years old. Whatever's doing that, he said quietly, hasn't been at it very long, geologically speaking. We asked the obvious questions. Had any divers been operating there? Any illegal dumping of equipment? Any chance this was man-made in the normal sense? No, no, and no. Then someone had the idea to count. We printed high-resolution stills from the video, taped them up, and started marking off each groove, each patch. It took hours. By the end, we had a rough number, around 10,000 individual marks. At the end of the sequence, where the camera cable reached its limit, there was a newer cluster. We counted those separately, 365. Right after that cluster, there was a slightly larger gap in the pattern. Then, the tally marks started again. One of the researchers stared at those numbers for a long time and then said what we were all thinking. It's days, it's counting days. 10,000 marks, that's about 27 years if you scratch one every day. But the monitoring data only went back 5 years, and the scraping on the recordings, that had been happening almost every night, sometimes for hours. If something down there was making a tally for every day it existed in that place, then either a lot of time wasn't being recorded, or the counting had started long before we ever put a microphone in the water. It should have stayed a weird anomaly, an unsolved puzzle you tell new staff about on slow nights. But the river didn't leave it there. The next few months, the pattern continued, scraping between 2 and 4 a.m. when the water cooled. More marks on follow-up camera drops. The count climbing. Another 365 in that new cluster by the end of the year. Then, one morning, we got something else. The hydrophone had recorded a thud. A heavy impact near the sensor, strong enough to spike the levels. Then another. And another. Regular spacing. Slower than the scraping. Less of a drag, more of a step, like footsteps. On rock, underwater. We watched the corresponding camera footage. Visibility was bad. Thermal steam and mineral particles clouded everything, but you could see the sediment jump with each impact. Something heavy was walking along the bottom, not swimming. Not drifting, walking. Each step landing roughly the same distance apart. We measured it. The intervals suggested bipedal movement. Two-legged. Not four, not many. Two. The impacts moved past the camera and continued downstream, then faded. We dropped the camera again 3 days later. More marks had appeared. Not in neat tallies this time, but longer, deeper gouges. Angled. Repeated in the same sequence, over and over. One of the grad students took the pattern home and tried to match it to anything: languages, codes, waveforms. He came back in a week looking exhausted. "You're not going to like this," he said, and laid out his notes. The sequence matched human speech rhythms, not words, not any language we know, but the timing of it. Stress, pause, stress, intonation. The spacing of the gouges lined up with how a human would speak a sentence if each syllable was a strike. Something under that river wasn't just counting anymore. It was trying to talk. We sent all of it up the chain. Recordings. Still images. The pattern analysis. The footsteps. The tally marks. The estimated time frame. The fact that no known human activity could account for anything we were seeing. The answer came back neat and simple. Geological phenomena. Continue monitoring. No field intervention authorized. But they quietly adjusted something in the internal documents. That section of the firehole used to be listed as elevated thermal risk for any in-water work. Now, in the fine print of the maintenance protocols, it has a new designation. No direct human access permitted. Remote equipment only. No one goes in the water there anymore. Not officially. The scraping hasn't stopped. The marks keep accumulating. And the footsteps, those slow, regular impacts, are getting closer to the hydrophones every year. The last recording I reviewed before asking for a transfer from that rotation had something new in it. Under the river noise, under the faint metallic grinding, there was a sound like air being forced through something that wasn't meant to handle air anymore. A wet, broken attempt at breathing. Then, distorted by water and heat and distance, a single, drawn-out syllable. Long, strained, almost human. It sounded a lot like someone trying to remember how to say out. The tally cluster at the end of the line now stands at 365 plus 18. 18 marks beyond a clean year. If it's counting days since it started trying to talk, then whatever is down there has been asking to get out for a little over a year and a half. And every time I drive past that stretch of river, even in summer with the tourists and the fishermen and the picture-perfect steam, all I can think about is this. Those marks are carved into rock. The riverbed is changing. The channels are eroding. At some point, one of those tallied lines is going to cut all the way through. When that happens, the river will adjust. The flow will change. And whatever has been walking along the bottom, scraping messages into stone where no one can answer them, is going to find a new path to the surface. There are places in Yellowstone where radio silence isn't unusual. Deep canyons, thick forest, thermal interference, all of it can kill your signal. You learn to work around it, you check in before entering dead zones, you carry backup communication, and if something goes wrong, you follow protocols that have been refined over decades of search and rescue operations. But what happened on Specimen Ridge in September 2022 wasn't radio silence. It was something speaking back. I need you to understand how communication works out there. Every ranger carries a radio tuned to specific frequencies. Dispatch monitors continuously. When you key your mic and speak, your voice goes out across the network, tagged with your unit number and approximate location. It's reliable, it's tested, it's the lifeline that keeps isolated staff connected to help. On September 11th, we were running routine maintenance on the radio repeater tower up on Specimen Ridge. High elevation, exposed location, incredible views, and some of the worst weather exposure in the park. The tower had been acting up intermittent static. Occasional dropout, so a two-person crew went up to check connections and replace some corroded components. Standard work. Should have taken 4 hours. At 11:47 a.m., dispatch received a radio transmission from one of the crew. Clear signal, calm voice, standard format. Dispatch, this is Unit 23. Maintenance on schedule. Weather clear. Winds moderate from southwest. Estimating completion by 1400 hours. Dispatch acknowledged. Logged it. Nothing unusual. Except Unit 23 wasn't assigned that day. The crew up on the ridge was Unit 17 and Unit 31. There was no Unit 23 on duty. There hadn't been a Unit 23 inches active rotation for 19 years. The dispatcher flagged it, tried to hail back. Unit 23, please confirm your designation and location. No response. She tried the actual maintenance crew. Unit 17, Unit 31, radio check. Static. She tried again, nothing. That's when the second transmission came through. Same voice, same calm, professional tone. Dispatch, Unit 23. Observing unusual thermal activity grid southeast. Recommend ground survey. Current position stable. No assistance required. The voice was clear. The phrasing was textbook. But the designation was impossible, and the maintenance crew wasn't responding. Dispatch tried every frequency, called out to any unit in the area, sent out a general hail. Radio silence except for that one voice. checking in every few minutes with perfect ranger protocol, reporting conditions, giving updates, always identifying as Unit 23. She pulled the archives. Unit 23 had been assigned to a ranger who died in 2003, helicopter crash during a rescue operation. He'd been on his way to assist with a medical emergency on the north side of the park when the aircraft went down on Specimen Ridge. Impact killed him instantly. The wreckage was recovered. The body was recovered. The radio smashed, destroyed, buried with full honors at his family's request. And now, 19 years later, his unit number was transmitting from the same ridge where he died. The dispatcher made the call. Emergency response. Get someone up to that tower immediately. The crew up there had gone silent, and something was using park frequencies to broadcast impossible transmissions. I was part of the response team, 3 of us, pushing hard up the access trail, trying to reach the ridge before weather moved in. The wind was picking up, clouds rolling in from the west. That exposed ridgeline is no place to be when conditions turn. We radioed as we climbed. Unit 17, Unit 31, please respond. Nothing. Then, crackling through with that same unnerving clarity. Dispatch, Unit 23, response team approaching from South Trail. Visibility decreasing. Recommend caution on final approach. I keyed my radio. Unit 23, identify yourself. Who is this? Silence for about 10 seconds. Then, Unit 23, continuing observation. Winds increasing from southwest, gusting to 30 knots. Temperature dropping. The voice wasn't distorted, wasn't mechanical. It sounded exactly like a ranger giving a weather report. Except it was coming from someone who'd been dead for 19 years, and it was describing conditions in real time as we experienced them. We reached the tower at 1:35 p.m. The maintenance crew was there, both of them, sitting on the ground near their equipment, backs against the tower base, staring out over the valley. They didn't acknowledge us when we arrived, didn't turn around, just sat there, completely still. I approached carefully. Hey, you guys okay? No response. I moved around to face them. Their eyes were open. They were breathing, but they weren't seeing anything. 1,000-yard stare, like they were looking through the landscape into something beyond it. One of my teammates checked vitals, pulse normal, breathing normal, pupils reactive. Physically, they were fine. Mentally, they were somewhere else entirely. That's when the radio crackled again. But this time, it wasn't coming through our handhelds. It was coming from the equipment at the tower. The actual repeater system, broadcasting at full strength across every park frequency. Dispatch, Unit 23. Observing approach of response team. 3 personnel. Conditions deteriorating. Recommend immediate evacuation. I looked at the tower. The equipment was on. The lights were active. And through the speaker mounted on the housing, that voice continued. Unit 23 to dispatch. Beginning final status report. Helicopter experiencing mechanical failure. Altitude dropping. Impact imminent. My blood went cold. Crew is advised. No survivors expected. Coordinates north, ridge specimen, elevation 9,200. Crash site will require recovery team. Repeat, no survivors. The voice stayed calm. Professional. Like he was reading from a script. Reporting his own death, in real time. 19 years after it happened. Unit 23, final transmission. Impact in 3, 2. The radio cut to static so loud it hurt, screaming white noise that lasted exactly 14 seconds. I counted. We all counted. Because there was nothing else to do except stand there and listen to what sounded like the moment someone died, replayed through equipment that shouldn't have been capable of storing that transmission, let alone broadcasting it. When the static cleared, there was one more transmission. Crash site confirmed. Unit 23 requesting immediate assistance. Multiple personnel, unresponsive. Repeat, requesting assistance. But the voice had changed. It wasn't calm anymore. It was strained, desperate, confused. Dispatch, why isn't anyone responding? I've been calling for hours. The crew is here but they won't answer. I need help. Please respond. Hours. He said hours. The crash happened at 2:34 p.m. on the 11th of September 2003. The response team reached him 47 minutes later. By then, he'd been dead for at least 30 minutes, likely killed instantly on impact. But according to this transmission, he'd been alive for hours after the crash, calling, waiting, watching his crew stay silent. Just like the maintenance crew was doing now. Sitting, silent, staring. Dispatch. It's getting dark. I don't understand why no one's coming. The radio is working. I can hear you. Why can't you hear me? One of my teammates tried to shut down the repeater, hit the emergency cutoff. Nothing happened. The voice kept going. I've been waiting so long. The others won't talk to me. They just sit there. I don't know what's wrong with them. Please, someone tell me what's happening. We physically disconnected the power supply, pulled cables, cut the feed. The voice didn't stop. It was coming from the equipment itself, even with no power source. Broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't have been accessible. Reaching across 19 years of silence to ask a question no one had ever answered. Why didn't you come? I waited. I kept calling. I did everything right. I followed protocol. Why am I still here? That's when one of the maintenance crew spoke. First words since we'd arrived. He didn't look at us, didn't move, just stared out over the valley and said in a flat, distant voice, "He's been asking that since we got here. He doesn't know he's dead. He thinks it just happened. He thinks we're the crew from his helicopter. He's asking us why we won't help him." The radio transmission continued. "Please. I'm so cold. It's been days now. Or hours. I can't tell anymore. Time doesn't work right here. But I'm still waiting. I'll keep waiting. Someone has to come eventually." We evacuated, got the maintenance crew down off that ridge, got them to medical. They recovered physically within a day. Mentally, it took weeks. They both described the same experience. Arriving at the tower, beginning work, and then suddenly being somewhere else, sitting in twisted metal. Smelling fuel and smoke, hearing someone calling their names, asking for help, begging them to respond. And no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything except sit there and listen to someone slowly realize they were dead. The official report attributed it to equipment malfunction and possible carbon monoxide exposure from a thermal vent near the tower base. The crew was cleared for duty after psych evaluation. The repeater was replaced entirely. New equipment, new frequencies, new protocols. But here's what they don't tell you. The transmissions didn't stop. Every year on September 11th, park communications experience interference on the old frequencies. For exactly 14 seconds at 2:34 p.m., there's static across all channels. Emergency services have learned to expect it. They log it as atmospheric disturbance and move on. And if you're on Specimen Ridge at the right time, if you're carrying a radio tuned to those old frequencies, you'll hear it. That same voice, still calling, still waiting. Dispatch, Unit 23, requesting assistance. How long has it been? I've lost track. Days? Weeks? Why hasn't anyone come? The maintenance crew both requested transfers. They don't work high-elevation repeater sites anymore. Neither of them will carry a radio on September 11th. They say it doesn't matter if it's powered on or not. If you're holding one, you'll hear him asking his questions, waiting for an answer that never comes. And there's something else they mentioned, something that wasn't in any report. While they were sitting there on the ridge, locked in that frozen state, unable to move or speak, they could see something in the wreckage, a figure, moving through the debris, checking equipment, picking up pieces, setting them down. Over and over, like someone trying to understand what happened, trying to figure out what went wrong. And every time the figure moved, time would skip. A second would become a minute. An hour would compress into a moment. The sun would jump across the sky. The seasons would flicker past. 19 years, cycling through in stuttering, disjointed fragments while this figure just kept searching through wreckage that had been cleared away decades ago. One of the crew members said the worst part wasn't hearing the voice. It was watching that figure finally stop searching, turn toward them, and ask not through the radio, but directly, face to face, in that impossible place. How do I leave? I've been trying to leave since this happened, but every time I think I'm walking away, I'm back here again. How do I stop waiting? They couldn't answer. They were locked in that moment, experiencing time the way he experienced it. Broken, cyclical, trapped. When they finally came back to themselves on the ridge, hours had passed. But in their memory, they'd been there for days. Weeks. Years. Maybe. sitting with someone who didn't know how to stop waiting for help that had arrived too late. The repeater tower is still there, still operational, but there's a new protocol now. If you're assigned to Specimen Ridge on September 11th, you work in pairs, you maintain constant verbal contact. And if anyone starts describing seeing someone who isn't there, hearing voices on dead frequencies, or losing track of time, you evacuate immediately. Because whatever is waiting up there isn't bound by normal rules. Time doesn't work the same. Death doesn't work the same. And if you listen too long to that voice still calling for help, you might find yourself trapped in the same loop, waiting, asking questions, watching time slip past while you're locked in a single moment that never ends. Unit 23 is still out there, still calling, still waiting for someone to tell him how to stop. There are protocols for everything in search and rescue. Lost hikers, medical emergencies, wildlife encounters. We have procedures refined over decades, clear steps, reliable methods. But in February 2024, Park Administration added a new protocol that nobody talks about publicly. It has no official name. It's just listed in the training manual as Grand Canyon Evacuation Protocol, Section 9C. And if you ask what it's for, you'll get a careful non-answer about safety precautions and updated best practices. What they won't tell you is why. I can tell you, because I was there when they wrote it. I was on the team that made it necessary. It started with a routine rescue call, hiker with a possible ankle injury, somewhere between Artist Point and Upper Falls in the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. Standard stuff. The canyon is spectacular, 300-foot waterfalls, sheer walls dropping hundreds of feet, that incredible yellow and orange rock that gives the park its name. It's also dangerous, steep trails, unstable edges, weather that changes fast. We assembled quickly. 4-person team. I was leading. We had good daylight, clear conditions, solid intel on the hiker's approximate position. Should have been straightforward. Down the trail, stabilize the injury, assist them back up or call for additional support if needed. 2 hours, maybe 3. We started down the trail at 2:15 p.m. The first sign something was wrong came about 20 minutes in. One of my team members stopped suddenly and turned around, staring back up the trail. "Did you hear that?" she asked. I hadn't heard anything. Canyon acoustics are strange echoes bounce off the walls in weird ways. Water sounds carry for miles. Hear what? Someone calling my name. We all stopped, listened. Just the distant roar of the falls, wind through the canyon, the usual ambient noise. Nothing that sounded like a voice. "Probably just echo distortion," I said. "Sound gets weird down here." She nodded, but she looked uneasy. We continued. 10 minutes later, another team member stopped. Same thing. He'd heard his name, clear as anything, coming from somewhere behind us on the trail. Now I was paying attention. "Everyone stay together. Keep moving." We found the injured hiker about 40 minutes in. She was stable, conscious, sitting on a bench near a scenic overlook, twisted ankle, nothing severe. We did the assessment. Fitted a support brace. Helped her up. She could walk with assistance. Perfect. We'd have her back up top within the hour. That's when I heard it. My own voice, calling my name. From down the trail ahead of us, the direction we'd come from. Except we were heading back up. There was nothing ahead of us but the path we'd already walked. I stopped. The whole team stopped. We all heard it that time. Not one voice. 4 voices. Each of us hearing our own name, called in our own voice, coming from the exact direction we were moving toward. The injured hiker looked at us with wide eyes. "What is that?" "Stay close," I said. "Everyone stays within arm's reach. Do not respond to anything you hear. Do not leave the group." We started moving again. Faster now. The voices continued. My name, in my voice, getting clearer. Like I was standing just around the next bend in the trail, calling to myself. The others reported the same thing. Each of us hearing ourselves. Always just ahead. Always out of sight. Then one of my team saw something that made her grab my arm hard enough to hurt. There, on the trail. I looked. About 50 yards ahead, where the path curved around an outcropping, there was movement. Someone walking. Same uniform as mine. Same pack. Same build. Walking away from us, at exactly the same pace we were walking. I stopped. The figure stopped. I took a step. The figure took a step. Perfect synchronization. 3 seconds delayed. That's not possible, someone whispered behind me. But it was happening. I could see myself or something wearing my shape moving through the canyon ahead of me, matching my movements with that eerie 3-second lag. I raised my hand. 3 seconds later, the figure raised its hand. The other team members were seeing it too. Each of us had a double now, moving ahead of us on the trail. 4 figures, perfectly mimicking us, staying just out of clear visual range, but close enough that we could see the shapes, the gestures, the movements. New plan, I said, voice tight. We go back, different route. We take the alternate trail up to... We can't, one of them interrupted. Look. I turned around. Behind us, back down the trail, there were 4 more figures. Walking toward us. Same uniforms. Same packs. Same everything. Moving in perfect synchronization with us, 3 seconds behind. We were boxed in, versions of ourselves ahead, versions of ourselves behind, and the canyon walls rising on both sides, offering no escape route. The injured hiker was starting to panic. What is this? What's happening? I didn't have an answer. Every instinct screamed that we needed to move, but which direction? Forward toward ourselves? Backward toward ourselves? Then I noticed something about the figures ahead. They weren't quite right. The movements were perfect, yes, but the angles were wrong. When I shifted my weight to my left foot, my double shifted right. When I turned my head, my double turned the opposite direction, like a mirror image, not a true copy. They're inverted, I said. Everything they do is backwards from us. One of my team, a guy who'd been doing this work for 12 years, said quietly, so if we stop moving, we stopped. All of us. Complete stillness. 3 seconds later, the figures ahead stopped. 3 seconds after that, the figures behind stopped. We stood there in absolute silence. The canyon held its breath. 8 figures frozen on the trail, 4 real and 4 impossible, locked in a moment that felt like it could stretch forever. On 3, I said, we move left, off trail, into the brush, fast, don't look back. 1, 2, 3. We broke formation, crashed through the scrub pine and loose rock at the trail's edge, dragging the injured hiker with us, ignoring protocols about staying on designated paths, because staying on the path meant staying with those things. Behind us, I heard movement. Synchronized. Perfect. Coming after us. We scrambled up a steep section that wasn't really a trail, grabbing roots and rocks, pulling ourselves up, pushing the hiker ahead. My lungs burned. The canyon walls felt like they were closing in. And then suddenly, we were at the rim, back on level ground. The parking area visible through the trees. Tourist families walking past. Normal afternoon sounds. The world snapping back into focus. We turned around. The slope we just climbed was empty. No figures, no movement. Just the canyon below us, beautiful and deadly and utterly still. The injured hiker was shaking. Did that really happen? We got her to medical. Filed our reports. Described exactly what we'd experienced. I expected skepticism, maybe concern, about our mental state. Instead, administration listened carefully, asked specific questions, and thanked us for the detailed documentation. 2 weeks later, the new protocol appeared in the training materials. Section 9C, Grand Canyon Evacuation Protocol. The key points are these. If any team member reports hearing their own voice calling for help from a direction you haven't traveled, immediate evacuation is required. If any team member reports seeing movement that mirrors their own actions with a delay of 3 seconds or more, immediate evacuation is required. If these conditions occur, teams must leave the canyon using the most direct route available, regardless of trail designation. Mission abort rate in Grand Canyon rescues has been 83% since this protocol was implemented. 83%. That's not equipment failure. That's not weather. That's teams encountering something that triggers Section 9C and getting out immediately. But here's what the protocol doesn't explain. Why 3 seconds? Why mirrors? Why does it happen in that specific section of the canyon? I went back through incident reports, dating back 20 years, found 4 other cases with similar details. Teams reporting echo phenomena, seeing doubles, experiencing disorientation, all in the same area. All dismissed as acoustic anomalies or altitude effects. And in each case, there was one common thread. The team had been moving downward into the canyon when it started, and the phenomena always positioned itself between the team and the way out. Like something was trying to keep people down there. The protocol has one more element they don't advertise. It's in the classified addendum. I only saw it because I helped write it. If a team encounters Section 9C conditions and successfully evacuates, they are prohibited from returning to that section of the canyon for a minimum of 72 hours. During that time, trail cameras in the area are reviewed for anomalous activity. Every single time a team evacuates under Section 9C, the trail cameras show something in the hours afterward. Figures, usually 4 of them, walking the trails, wearing ranger uniforms, moving in perfect formation, searching. The cameras never get clear shots, always distant, always partially obscured, but the pattern is consistent. The figures walk the trails for exactly 3 hours after each evacuation, then disappear. Park Service doesn't discuss it. The protocol exists to keep people safe, but it also exists to keep people from asking too many questions. Because if you start asking why something in that canyon creates perfect copies of rescue teams, you have to start asking other questions. Like whether those copies stay in the canyon, like whether they ever make it to the rim, like whether, sometimes, when a rescue team comes back up, all the members are actually the same people who went down. Last month, someone broke protocol. Experienced ranger, been doing canyon rescues for 15 years, encountered Section 9C conditions, and decided to push through instead of evacuating. Wanted to prove it was psychological, not real. He made it back up, completed the rescue. Everything seemed fine. Except his wife called park administration 3 days later. Said he'd been acting strange, wasn't sleeping, kept standing at windows staring out at nothing. And when she asked him questions, he'd answer 3 seconds late, every time. Perfectly synchronized delay, like he was waiting for something to tell him what to say. He's on extended medical leave now. The official reason is stress-related exhaustion. The unofficial reason is that his coworkers won't work with him anymore. Because when they're in the field and he moves, they see it twice, once when he does it, and once more, 3 seconds later, like an afterimage that hasn't quite caught up to the present. Section 9C is still in effect, still classified, still protecting people from something we don't fully understand. And every team that goes into that canyon knows if you hear yourself calling, if you see yourself moving, you have one choice. Run. Don't look back. Don't try to understand. Because the canyon has rules we never agreed to. And it's still collecting. If you've made it this far, you've heard 8 stories that don't appear in official park records. 8 testimonies from rangers who saw things that shouldn't exist. These aren't the only stories. They're just the ones we can talk about. This is Verified Whispers. We find the testimonies that get buried, the incidents that don't make sense, the protocols that exist for reasons no one will explain. If these stories found you, there's a reason. Subscribe, turn on notifications, because the next testimony could answer questions you didn't know you had, or raise new ones you'll never be able to ignore. The whispers don't stop, neither do we. Until next time, stay curious, stay careful, and if you ever find yourself in a place where the rules feel wrong, trust that feeling. It might be the only thing that gets you out.